In 1934, at the age of 18, Ken enlisted in the U.S. Navy as an apprentice seaman. He went through boot camp at Norfolk, Virginia, and was assigned to a couple of destroyers, the USS Dent for a few months, then the USS Buchanan for almost a year. In 1936, he was transferred to Coco Solo Naval Air Station in the Panama Canal. On January 16, 1936, Ken's dad, Emil H. Sederquist, died of pneumonia at the age of 56. Ken was not granted leave to go home to Iowa for the funeral, and he never understood why. He was assigned the rating of aviation metalsmith, and that's probably when his desire to become a pilot began. He requested training through the Naval Aviation Pilot, or NAP, program for enlisted men. This program provided the same naval aviator training received by commissioned officers. However, his requests were turned down. In March of 1938, after his 4-year commitment to the Navy was fulfilled, he received an honorable discharge. However, he didn't give up. The very next month, Ken re-enlisted, but only after the Navy committed to sending him to flight school in Pensacola, Florida. Our military knew war was imminent and they would need pilots. While awaiting an opening to the elite NAP program, he served for several months on the aircraft carrier USS Lexington under Captain Elliott Buckmaster, and then at the San Diego Naval Air Station. In June of 1942, Elliott Buckmaster was captain of the USS Yorktown, the flagship of Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher at the pivotal Battle of Midway. In April 1939, Ken was finally sent to the National Flight Academy at Pensacola Naval Air Station. In March of 1940, he graduated and earned his Navy Wings of Gold. With the rating of Chief Aviation Metalsmith, he was designated Naval Aviation Pilot and assigned to VP Squadron 5-1. In July of 1941, the squadron was renumbered to VP Squadron 7-1. The squadron flew PBY-5 seaplanes patrolling the North Atlantic for just over a year out of Puerto Rico, Norfolk, New York, and Argentia naval air stations up and down the eastern seaboard. Great Britain's survival depended on her ability to keep the supply line to and from America open. Nazi U-boats were sinking British merchant ships at an alarming rate. They were even infiltrating the Gulf of Mexico. PBY-5s were ideal long-range reconnaissance aircraft and, as such, were able to help disrupt some of these U-boat operations. Remember, the USA was not at war yet, officially. That would all change on Sunday morning, December 7, 1941, at 7:48 a.m., when Pearl Harbor was attacked by Imperial Japan. According to Ken's first flight log entry for December, on Saturday the 6th, the squadron was based at Argentia Naval Air Station in Newfoundland. Ken and his squadron were thousands of miles and several time zones away from Pearl Harbor, patrolling the icy North Atlantic waters surrounding Greenland to find Nazi U-boats. Knowing war was inevitable, they were still shocked, outraged, and horrified at the news of the surprise Japanese attack on our naval base at Pearl Harbor, as was all of America. News was sketchy, communications were imperfect, and emotions were high. It would be some time before the devastation was revealed to the world. That over 2,400 members of the United States military were killed and 1,178 people were wounded. Numerous aircraft had been destroyed on the ground, and our Pacific battleship fleet lay in ruins at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. In the midst of the turmoil following the attack on Pearl Harbor, our highest-ranking officers commenced to make plans to get reinforcements and other logistical support to Hawaii as soon as possible. A Japanese invasion and occupation of the Hawaiian Islands was a genuine threat. They were under maximum stress, yet had to strategize and issue orders with absolute precision to get men, equipment, supplies, aircraft, and ships to Pearl Harbor. Imperfect information and communication methods at the time presented many challenges, but our leaders conveyed these orders in an extremely short period of time. America's military forces had to be informed, organized, mobilized, and coordinated on a massive scale, and fast. There was a tremendous sense of urgency from the President on down the chain of command. Airplane mechanics, technicians, flight crews, and administrative assistants at America's military installations worldwide knew that the life of our nation was at stake. America was severely wounded and had been brought to her knees. Churches around the country filled with those praying for our soldiers overseas that were in harm's way. On Monday, December 8th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave his profound and powerful speech on the Day of Infamy, and the United States Congress unanimously declared war on Imperial Japan. VP Squadron 71 received orders to depart Argentia Naval Air Station on December 9th and arrive at Pearl Harbor no later than December 26th. Along the way, they stopped at 6 designated naval air stations around the eastern, southern, and western seaboards of the continental U.S. At each stop, their propeller-driven PBY-5s received modifications and upgrades to ensure that the aircraft were combat-ready when they arrived at Pearl Harbor. In addition, to accomplish the 18-hour trip from Alameda Naval Air Station to Oahu, 4 additional fuel tanks were mounted on each PBY-5. The planes were retrofitted and improved within 2 weeks. Upon arrival at Pearl Harbor, their 17-day journey covered close to an astonishing 7,000 miles. These improvements included additional armor plating around the cockpit to shield the pilots, additional armament, improved communications equipment, engine upgrades, and fine-tuned strategic combat flight training, as well as food storage and hygiene upgrades. They flew faster than the normal cruising speed of 124 miles per hour and used more fuel by doing so in order to arrive at Pearl Harbor in a little over 18 hours. There was no time to waste. They had to get there as soon as possible. On December 9th, the first leg of the journey was an 8-hour flight from Argentia Naval Air Station to Quonset Point Naval Air Station in Rhode Island, the birthplace of the U.S. Navy. The well-known Quonset hut was also developed here and became an integral part of U.S. military housing needs during World War II and beyond. During World War II, Naval Air Station Quonset Point was on the cutting edge of research regarding airborne radar and electronic systems. It took 5 days to upgrade the avionics, radio communications, as well as electronic navigation systems in each of the PBY-5s. Ironically, only 2 days after they left Argentia, Nazi Germany declared war against the United States on December 11th. Stunned, the thoughts of each man in the squadron undoubtedly flashed back to their patrols in the North Atlantic. England needed their help in her fight for survival against the menacing Nazi U-boat threat. But they had a new set of orders now. Reach Pearl Harbor no later than December 26th in combat-ready condition, and it was imperative they focused accordingly. On Sunday the 14th, the squadron made the 3-hour flight to Norfolk Naval Air Station in Virginia, where additional work on the planes took 2 more days. The assembly and repair crews were well-prepared experts at overhauling aircraft engines and fuselages. From there, they flew nearly 6 hours to the Naval Air Station at Pensacola for further upgrades. A day later, they made a 4.5-hour flight to Corpus Christi Naval Air Station in Texas. For 3 days, they acquired additional strategic combat flight training. In 1941, a staff of 800 instructors provided training for more than 300 student pilots per month at Corpus Christi Naval Air Station. That training rate nearly doubled after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. From Corpus Christi, they took to the air again on Saturday morning the 20th for a 9-hour flight to San Diego Naval Air Station. The very next morning, after refueling, the squadron took off for Alameda Naval Air Station. Possibly due to bad weather, they were forced to land just outside San Francisco Bay at the Farallon Islands, where they spent the night. On Monday, December 22nd, they made the short 1-hour hop to Alameda Naval Air Station, where the squadron stayed for 3 days. Each plane got its final stage of upgrades. 4 additional fuel tanks installed on each PBY-5. The most challenging part of their mission lay ahead. The arduous and at times emotional 18-plus hour flight from San Francisco Bay to Pearl Harbor. They departed Alameda Naval Air Station on Christmas night after their last hot meal for a while and lots of prayers. They would have departed at night for a couple of reasons. By flying all night, they would arrive at Pearl Harbor during daylight hours and not be mistaken for enemy aircraft, a very real possibility only a few weeks after the attack. In addition, They would not be flying into the sun. They flew with a compass, calculated the crosswinds, and used only instrumentation to guide them over the vast ocean to their destination. With the added weight of the surplus fuel tanks, getting airborne was a challenge. The length of the flight path in San Francisco Bay was too short for the heavy-laden aircraft to clear the towering Golden Gate Bridge, so they flew under it. They climbed methodically to cruising altitude. Next stop, Pearl Harbor. For the duration of the flight, the three-man crew rotated between duties and sleep. It was a solemn flight, as there was only bad news on the Armed Forces radio network. The Japanese proceeded to humble the combined military forces of the United States, Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Australia. Japan conquered the Philippines, Malaya and Singapore, as well as the Dutch East Indies, during their 6-month offensive rampage to open the war. Sporadic shelling by Japanese submarines stoked fears that even America's west coast might be attacked. They arrived at Pearl Harbor on Friday, December 26th. Oil fires were still burning from the December 7th attacks as the harbor came into view. Despite the communications upgrades, the squadron never received the radio orders to fly into Kaneohe Bay Naval Air Station. They might have very well been mistakenly identified as enemy aircraft because of the breakdown in communication. Their PBY-5 flying boats did not have landing gear and set down in the waters of Pearl Harbor. The oil was up to 20 feet deep in places, especially amongst the carnage of Battleship Row. They avoided that area and set down near the refueling dock. The towing crew had to wade into the oily waters to hook the planes to towing cables so the planes could be pulled to the dock for refueling, cleaning, and inspection. It was a dangerous, slippery, contaminated job. Afterwards, the towing crew had to clean up with kerosene, then soap and water. War conditions demanded that later models be installed with landing gear, so the PBY-5A Catalina was developed. After the long flight, Ken and his squadron stayed in Pearl Harbor patrolling for 2 days as the Navy's long-range eyes and ears, conducting search operations on the lookout for the Japanese and possible repeat attacks. The last entry in Ken's flight log for December was from Sunday the 28th. Ken and his squadron patrolled for nearly 11 hours around the east side of Oahu near Kaneohe Bay Naval Air Station, which was also severely hit during the Pearl Harbor attacks. Ken's flight log indicated that for the next few months, the squadron patrolled around the Hawaiian Islands because the threat of another attack on Pearl Harbor was very real. On April 23, 1942, Ken was promoted to ensign and appointed naval aviator. Squadron 71 performed reconnaissance as well as search and rescue missions throughout the South Pacific from August 1942 through 1943. The squadron patrolled the skies and seas during the Solomon, Gilbert, and Marshall Islands campaigns and performed many sea rescues of downed pilots. During the first part of 1943, Ken's mother, Anna Sederquist, worked with a young lady at Montgomery Wards in Los Angeles named Barbara Main. Anna told Barbara about her 2 sons, Ken, who was in the South Pacific fighting the Japanese, and Donald, who was preparing to go to England to fight the Nazis. Donald met Barbara for a date at her home one day, and also met her sister, Dolores. Donald wrote Ken that Dolores looked like Judy Garland and that Ken should meet her. Anna gave Ken's military address to Dolores, and they got to know each other well as pen pals. Ken received the news that on October 4th of 1943, his younger brother, 2nd Lieutenant Donald L. Sederquist, was missing in action. He was a U.S. Army Air Force B-24 co-pilot with the 579th Squadron of the 392nd Bomber Group. Donald's plane was shot down over the North Sea following a bombing mission over Nazi-occupied Holland. They were brothers fighting enemies across the world from each other. The pain of not knowing whether his brother was alive or not must have weighed heavily on Ken at this time. However, he had to maintain focus on his duties and the job at hand. For the last part of Ken's tour in the Pacific, he also flew the B-24 Liberator, a 4-engine bomber and reconnaissance aircraft that had much greater range than the PBY-5. While home on leave, in February of 1944, he met Dolores Main in person. Ken asked Dolores to marry him on their second date. Dolores asked him, "What if I say no?" To which he replied, "Then I'll go back to the war." Well, Dolores didn't want that, so they were engaged in the spring and married August 20th, 1944 in Huntington Park, California. Ken and all 4 ushers were Navy pilots and Lieutenant JGs stationed in San Diego. Jack Holt was the best man, and Frank Murphy, Kurt Layton, and Al Lemke were groomsmen. Dolores' sister, Barbara, was maid of honor. Ken's 2 sisters, Marjorie and Dorothy, and Dolores' best friend, Ella Mae, were bridesmaids. After a brief honeymoon in Santa Barbara, Ken and Dolores were stationed in San Diego through the end of the war. The real Medal of Honor effort by Ken and Dolores would be that over the next 17 years, their 8 daughters, Carol, Catherine, Donna, Mary, Helen, Anne, Linda, and Janet were born. During the many transfers, 7 were born in Navy hospitals from coast to coast, and all except 1 were born while Ken was on active duty. In 1946, he was transferred to Oahu and commissioned as a lieutenant commander at Kaneohe Naval Air Station. In 1947, Ken was appointed commanding officer of Squadron 116 at Barbers Point. However, 6 months later, the squadron was decommissioned based on Ken's input to the admiral that it was a wartime operation and was no longer needed. In 1948, Ken attended Northwestern University and studied math, law, and engineering. In 1950, the Korean War broke out. Ken was assigned as operations officer on the USS Corson, which was a seaplane tender in dry dock at Alameda. In 1951, the Corson set sail for Okinawa, where it was docked, servicing the seaplanes involved in the air-sea rescue operations of downed pilots. During the Cold War, Ken's duties would again shift back to submarine patrol in the North Atlantic, patrolling for Russian nuclear subs rather than Nazi U-boats. He closed out the final 4 years of his Navy career training pilots at Corpus Christi Naval Air Station, and in 1961 he retired as lieutenant commander. From 1968 to 1980 he worked for and retired from Continental Airlines. Eventually he became part of the Silver Eagles Association for the retired Naval Aviation Pilots. The NAPs contributed significantly to American aviation in both World War I and World War II. Ken and his fellow NAPs were a unique part of America's naval aviation arm and contributed significantly to America's hard-fought victory over Imperial Japan in the Pacific. These flying petty officers and non-commissioned officers performed a significant role in the development and growth of U.S. Naval, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard aviation, including those like VP Squadron 7-1, who served with distinction in the Pacific Theater during World War II. One can learn more about the NAP program at www.navalaviationmuseum.org, which houses the documentation and articles about the Silver Eagles Association and the NAP exhibit at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. BlueJacket.com provides an alphabetical database of the naval aviation pilots. The last NAP retired in 1981. Over the years, many people have asked why Ken and Dolores had so many daughters. It may just have been God's way of giving the family more children to help ease the pain and fill the void from Donald's death during World War II. In the year 2000, Ken, Dolores, and Helen organized the Navy photos and documents for the first publication of Ken's Navy album. He only revealed about 10 aspects of his experience to the family in describing his squadron's mission from the North Atlantic to Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Ken passed into heaven on March 10, 2003. He was given a beautiful ceremony at Artesia Cerritos United Methodist Church, where the family has been attending since 1968, as well as a ceremony at Riverside National Cemetery with full military honors. His earthly resting place is under the many airplanes taking off and landing at March Air Force Base next to the cemetery.